Hello, welcome to the final edition of Wild Celery. To my right is Harry Chapin. You're known as a songwriter, but how many hours in a day do you actually spend writing songs and performing, and what happens during the other parts of that day, the other parts of that week?
Well, I do about 200 to 220 concerts a year. Obviously, that takes a certain amount of time, and traveling to and from those takes some time. But I guess I've been known for the last 3 or 4 years as the most politically and socially active performer in America. I found a lot of music critics are wishing I'd spend more time in politics, and a lot of politicians are wishing I was spending more time in music. But anyway, or at least suggesting that I do. But,
why politics now?
Well,
How did that start?
Well, when I say politics, it's not per se the who gets elected here and there. It's just that I had the obligatory big mouth during the '60s. Why don't more successful people do more for the society? La 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 la. And then when Taxi was a hit for me in 1972, I had to face my own bull, which is one of those awkward moments in one's life where you have to start living up to your own words. So for a while I did guilt benefits, name a disease, I did a benefit for it, and I realized I wasn't being very effective. So what I tried to do is move from symptoms and gestures into substance and to causes and causes of problems. The example would be, if I was going to give you an analogy, let's say there was an imaginary automobile company that built automobiles that when hit from behind burst into flame. Now, nothing like that would ever happen in the real world, you know that. But just imagine there was one. There'd be two ways of dealing with that. One is in your town where they sold a lot of those automobiles, to come up with the best ambulance unit possible, the best emergency room, the best burn unit, and to deal with the victims as most humanely as possible. Another way would be ask, why in hell do we allow a company to build automobiles that burst into flame upon impact? One is dealing with the symptoms, one is dealing with the causes.
Where are you then?
Well, I think I'm trying to deal more and more as I get older with causes, because in effect, in a sense, I think we're at a very dangerous time in American history, dangerous in the sense that we may be losing what this country stands for. And what that means is the so-called enlightened middle class, which is most of us in this room, probably most of the people watching, have a responsibility. Our founding fathers said very clearly, if you leave the business of government up to the leaders or the institutions, they're always going to mess it up. The reason we do have a participatory democracy is for people like you and I to be the ombudsman, to not just vote every 2 years, but to care enough to ask the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 10th, 20th questions about everything from economics to environment to education to inflation to defense to hunger.
So in effect, you at one point decided that here you've got people's attention and you want to do something more with it than tell them stories?
Well, the stories are important. I'm proud of what I've done with my music and continue to do. But there's a great line by Gene McCarthy that was about football. It said you got to be smart enough to play the game and dumb enough to think it matters.
What game are you playing now in politics? Can you explain a little bit about the World Hunger Year and the food policy program?
Yeah.
And how you got into that?
Well, I am not quite dumb enough to think the pop music game alone matters. And I'm just barely smart enough to play that game. So what I do is I raise money to have people work full-time in the Food Policy Center is our lobbying arm. It works in Washington, and the idea is to change policy that affect about $5 billion a year of expenditures, and literally, and then also has implications on the way we deal with the third world, the second world, and indeed our allies and our enemies. And as you know, we spend about 150 times more on weapons than we do on feeding people. We have an America that is dealing with inflation right now by letting our old people go hungrier and hungrier, letting our children get worse and worse education, letting our unemployment rate increase, and letting some basic decay occur in some of the major institutions of the country. And World Hunger Year is an educational and media foundation trying to give greater visibility to the hunger issue. In Des Moines, probably 10% of the population has a nutrition problem. That's extraordinarily high. It's probably higher and is higher in a lot of the major cities.
So what is World Hunger Year doing? Where do they come in that situation?
Well, number one, we put out various publications. Number two, what we're trying to do is make it a higher priority item. We just did a Gallup poll for the President's Commission, which I'm on, the President Commission on World Hunger, and also the White House Cambodia Crisis Committee. And we found that, frankly, it comes in fairly low in our realizations of what is important in the world. At the same time, we consider the Iranian situation very important. The irony is, if we'd had a relationship with the people of Iran rather than the Shah, if we'd, instead of selling him arms, been selling him things to help feed his own people and have a better relationship with those people, we would have had a far more friendly relationship with the society after the Shah left, rather than buying into. I was saying before that if there was an American Revolution happening somewhere in the world today, we'd support the British with our current foreign policy.
You know, you begin to sound like a lobbyist. There's a lot going on in your head and a lot of background you've gained. Why not drop the concertizing then and just go into politics?
Well, the more you see the political game, you realize that most of politics in America is maintenance men on the Titanic. They polish the brass, they clean the linen, but it has very little to do with who's the lookout, who's in the bridge, and who's in the engine room. In many cases, somebody recently said we got a Congress full of television announcers, people that know how to speak in 30-second news bites, have learned all the tricks of utilizing the media, but God forbid they should have original thought in their head. God forbid that they should have some ongoing commitment to an issue besides what's expedient in terms of the latest poll. I know about 35 senators and 150 congressmen through my work there, and I know enough that I don't envy their job given the realities of the way their job is defined. I would like to think that the criteria for success in American politics would mean that the American people in 1980 would have a choice a little better than between a 19th century idealist and a 20th century incompetent, which is Mr. Reagan and Mr. Carter. And I would like to think that the level of debate that is currently occurring on most of the major issues in Congress would be a little higher. I think the responsibility is not the congressmen's or the president's. The responsibility comes down to you and me. And I really think that the entertainment world and the media world are part and parcel of that problem.
Let me ask you this then. Go back to Harry Chapin, the artist. Are your stories, the stories you're telling on stage, the songs you're singing, changed now because of all the involvement you've had with politics lately?
I learned back in the 60s that it was not very good to lecture people. First of all, if anything, I have more foibles than most people. So most of my songs are about my own mistakes, my own idiocies, my own stupidities. And perhaps by sensitizing myself in my music to some of these things. Sorry if I'm rattling here. By God, I'm being taken care of well. Sensitizing myself to these issues. I mean, Cats in the Cradle is inherently a political song. It came because it talks about what you do with your life, what matters, the choices. You know, making napalm all day and going home and be nice to your kids is not good enough. The bottom line of it is that came from a poem my wife wrote zinging me for running around the country too much, not enough time at home. And I took it and made it into a song. But if you look at the overall body of work that I've done, everything from Taxi and Dogtown on the first album to Sniper and Better Place to Be on the second, to WOLD and Mr. Tanner on the third, and the fourth, Halfway to Heaven, and Cats in the Cradle and Flowers of Red and a bunch of these other songs, they're not propaganda music, but they are music that tends to talk about the conditions of everybody's lives in a story form. And I would hope that they would have, if not an explicit, at least an implicit message.
Do you consider yourself giving your own kind of homily? People have said you're a natural sermonizer. Do you agree with that?
Probably. Somebody said that my stuff is halfway between parables and passion plays. And I've had some people incensed at what I do, and some people think that I'm doing something that's unique and valuable. Obviously, I have a bias in terms of my vision of it, but one thing is true that everybody says, that I'm doing something different than the standard run-of-the-mill. I'm not into new wave. I'm not into disco. I'm not into whatever the latest trends are. I'm a storyteller. I'm a category of one in the music business, and I'm proud of that. And I've got a lot more stories to tell, and I've got a lot more living to do.
Well, what keeps you, though, on the road like this? Is there something that keeps ticking in your mind? A lot of people would say 10 years on the road, 10 albums, politics. That's one thing, but isn't there something new? Isn't there something different you want to go on to next?
Well, I'm working on a bunch of projects that I'm excited about. One, I'm doing a book for Doubleday based on the Mayor of Candlelight. Number two, I've got a film project called The Last Protest Singer, which is about Victor Jara and a bunch of other protest singers over the years.
Who's Victor Jara?
He's the guy who got, when Allende was overthrown, he was sort of the poet of Chile, and they rounded him up with a bunch of other supposed, quote, leftists, and they crushed his hands in the Santiago, Chile soccer stadium, and then and then shot him the next day. He was a man whose most radical act was to take Malvina Reynolds' song, Little Boxes, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes, translate it into Spanish and make it about the barrios, the shanty towns on the hillsides outside of the cities of Chile. And anyway, they shot him. This was 1973, I believe. As a matter of fact, the most meaningful piece of film I ever saw in my life was Joan Jarrah, who was an English lady who was married to him, talking on PBS for about 10 minutes, one roll of film, no cuts, about the death of her husband. And meanwhile, her 2 kids are playing in behind her. Meanwhile, she's crying, but she's not weeping. There's tears going down her face. And the immense dignity and the reality of, there's something very valuable about this exercise, that we have the option of talking into microphones and speaking freely. But I don't think the investment is being made by the American people, including me, enough back into the system, and I'm not talking about cash, to make that kind of future a guaranteed reality.
Are you talking about that kind of input wherein people listen to songs that you sing and change attitudes?
No, I'm talking about the last election, 1978. 38.8% of America bothered to vote. That was the lowest turnout in American history. It's the 3rd lowest turnout in Democratic history, in the planet, Democratic governments in the planet. The only 2 lower were Botswana, which has a 17% literacy rate, and people have to walk 40 miles through the bush. I'm talking about the fact that I stood over the casket of Allard Lowenstein a month ago, who was shot by a crazy former compatriot of his, the guy who started the Dump Johnson movement in 1968. I stood over that casket, and in the front row of the synagogue was Mrs. Martin Luther King, and in the 3rd row was Mrs. Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and behind me was Teddy Kennedy. Over here behind me was Andy Young. And I recalled, as his wife and 3 kids were sitting in front, that one of the big media signs of the 80s so far is a Columbia student on an anti-draft march. And it said, "There is nothing worth dying for." And in that company, it was sort of an interesting concept. If that is the rallying call of the 80s, I think we got terrible trouble. I think America's worth dying for. I think the American dream is worth dying for, and I don't think that people like you and I are paying those kind of dues enough. I'm trying, belatedly at age 37. Every year I make more money. Every year my net worth goes down, and it's not because of yachts, Learjets, and limousines. It's because I'm trying to invest in the American system in a participatory democracy.
What are you investing in? Where does a lot of your money go that's coming from these concerts and benefits?
Well, first of all, nobody comes to concerts because of the cause. So what's happening is Harry Chapin is reallocating his money. In other words, I perform a service, and which people are, thank God, are willing to pay for. Second of all, it all goes into organizations like World Hunger Year, the Food Policy Center. I also do more congressional and senatorial benefits than anybody else. I did 18 in 1978. I'll probably do somewhere around a like number. I also do a bunch of educational and artistic benefits for organizations that I believe in.
How many concerts a year does that come to? How long are you on the road?
I do between 200 and 230 a year, and about 100 which are benefits, and I'm on maybe 10 months a year.
What happens to the rest of the band then when you're going on your benefits? Do they stick around? Do they travel with you?
Some of the benefits are solo, some they do. Most of them now are solo, and I do them myself.
You've been together, though, with the band a long time. You expect them almost to be there when you're ready to go on another gig. Is that really important to what you're doing on stage, to have people you know? Yeah,
I think the kind of camaraderie, the kind of vibes, I frankly pay better than almost anybody else in the business. Most singer-songwriters have what they call a backup band. To me, it's not a backup band. We're all a group together. Steve and John are actually partners in the overall net, and I believe in what I'm doing. I believe in the people I'm doing it with, and it's very exciting. I hear so many people in the entertainment business talking about how tough it is or how tough touring is. I've had a lot of jobs in my life. This is the best one. I get a chance to play for thousands of people, make thousands of dollars, play what I want, where I want, when I want. I think I'm very lucky.
But where do you go home to? Where do you go and rest your feet?
Well, I go home to my home. My wife and 5 kids. My wife had 3 kids when I met her, and we've had 2 since by the normal methods. I also go home to motel rooms and my writing pad. I also go home to airplanes, and I also go home to rent-a-cars, and I also go home to Washington and World Hunger Year and the Food Policy Center offices. See, in the final analysis, it reminds me of You know, I had my accountant about 3 years ago tell me, Harry, you're not putting enough money for security. And I felt really chastised because he was warning me about all the economic troubles we were going to have. 3 days after that, we had a nice storm in Long Island where I live, and all of a sudden there was no heat, no light, no telephone, no electricity. Pipes burst. And I was sitting there with an asbestos glove in my hand, holding a frying pan, cooking eggs over an asbestos log that was in our fireplace. The house was 17 degrees. The warmest place in the house was my refrigerator, which was 27 degrees. And I realized that the final analysis, everybody's their own home. Everybody has to come to terms with himself. Everybody knows who and what they are, what they should be. And I'm not talking about the wins. I'm talking about the attitude, the process by which you live your life. And I should be doing what I'm doing, and that's what I'm doing.
So you don't sit down in the morning and make out a list about priority 1, 2, 3, and 4? You don't do that?
I reevaluate. What's that great line of Bob Dylan's? He who is not busy being born is busy dying. Luckily, I'm one of these people. My credo is, when in doubt, do something. So I make an awful lot of mistakes, and still it allows you to learn. It's a great story about the old lady from the ASPCA walking by a farm and seeing this farmer hitting his mule on the head with a 2x4, and she runs up to him and says, "What are you doing that to the poor animal?" He said, "Nothing, madam, just getting its attention." Well, I'm the mule, and life is the farmer with the 2x4 batting me on the head, and I gradually learn after enough impact on the forehead.
You've got one thing that you would say to an audience that's on a television screen who didn't come to the concert. What would it be?
Don't be frightened away from trying your dreams. This is a time when individuals matter. This is a time when we've got to fight for what we believe, and if we don't, we're going to lose it. That's what I'd say.
Thanks. Harry Chapin, and I'm Virginia Bishop. Thanks for watching Wild Celery, and hope you have a good summer.
Keep the change.